Right.
Wonderful. Well, I'm so pleased to be here. It's Christy Pettit speaking. I work with Pollinate Networks Inc., a very proud partner of both Nature Canada and Women for Nature, and we're thrilled to have everybody here today, including our panelists, Meg and Julie and Janet Bax, who's one of the folks who's going to co-moderate or is going to be my co-moderator here today and is our Women for Nature co-chair and mentorships project leader. So welcome to all of the people on the phone and the Zoom and everybody who is coming to support us today in this first opportunity to get together. I've been really fortunate to be working with Janet and also Jody Joy, of course, on really thinking about how do we evolve this idea of coming together to share information, to support each other, the way we do in the mentoring program with Women for Nature. And one of the things that people have been suggesting through the pilot and then through subsequent years as we've been working on the program is to bring people together around topics of interest in sort of a community of practice fashion. So super excited today. This is really the kickoff to all of that and the culmination of a lot of thinking and work that's gone into it. We wanted to bring forward some topics that people had expressed to us were of interest. This is the first of 3 webinars. So today we're going to talk about leading with confidence. Obviously, that's a deep topic, and we're really grateful to have Meg and Julie giving us the benefits of some of their experience. And we obviously also want to have the benefits of the experiences of the people here with us today. So we'll talk a little bit more about having some full participation as we go along. But I want to turn it over to Janet to do some proper introductions for our panel and our sponsors.
So thank you very much, Christy. And let me say first and foremost that it's really frustrating for somebody like myself and my generation not to be able to see everybody who's on the line and to see all your faces and to really be able to interact in that way. It's always frustrating when you're just doing it via voice. But I'm most grateful to you, Christy, and to those of you at Pollinate Canada for everything that you've done to get us here. And I'd like also to thank our sponsors, Natural Resources Canada, and in particular the Canadian Forestry Service of Natural Resources Canada, the Chalkers Foundation, and of course Pollinate Networks, without whom we would not be here. And I'd like also to put in a special thanks to Jody Joy of Nature Canada, because honestly, she has done a huge amount of work also and is my partner along with Christy, and I'm most grateful. And now, without further ado, let me introduce you to 2 incredible women leaders who are going to answer the questions today and really help get this going and really, I think, provide some real food for thought coming away from this first webinar. So first of all, Meg Beckel. Meg has got a very impressive, has had and is in the middle, I would say, of a very impressive career that has spanned such an interesting variety: the arts, academia, finance, the public sector, and she's held positions right across the country. She began working with the Bank of Nova Scotia before she moved to the National Ballet of Canada, the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra, the University of Calgary, the Royal Ontario Museum, and the University of Waterloo. Meg was appointed the CEO and president of the Canadian Museum of Nature in Ottawa in 2011. And since joining the museum, she has initiated a series of really important strategic changes in order to enhance the visitor experience and ensure the museum's position as a national museum of international first rank. And I think she's absolutely succeeded in doing that. The changes she's made have been innovative and really brought that museum up. She is a natural choice as a founding member of Women for Nature, given her efforts to inspire understanding and respect our natural heritage for all Canadians. And that is certainly a vision that we share at Nature Canada. So thank you, Meg. And I'll introduce Julie as well. Julie Gelfand, who's the Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development. Julie was appointed as Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development in March 2014. And before joining the Office of the Auditor General, Julie held the positions of Chief Advisor at Rio Tinto Canada and a VP of Environment and Social Responsibility at the Rio Tinto Iron Ore Company of Canada. Prior to joining the IOC, Julie was Vice President, Sustainable Development at the Mining Association of Canada and co-chair of the Corporate Social Responsibility Centre of Excellence under the Federal Corporate Social Responsibility Strategy for the Canadian International Extractive Sector. From 1992 to 2008, Julie served as President of Nature Canada, and she also founded and chaired the Green Budget Coalition. So, Christy, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for those intros. And again, to Janet's point, it would be so lovely if we could all be sitting around in a circle right now and see each other, but we can't. And we opted for the webinar version of Zoom simply to keep things a bit organized. We'd love to have lots of participation though, so feel free at any point to raise a hand or throw a comment in. We'll make sure that everybody's comments get addressed at some point along the way. But we are going to ask some questions of our panel and ask them to give their sort of their considered response. And then, as I say, feel free to put your hand up or chuck in questions, and we'll make sure that those get integrated into the conversation along the way. So the first question that we have is around those crucial skill sets or characteristics. So let's start with Meg, if I could. And as you reflect on the idea of if you had to pick a few things that really have got you by and helped you move forward in your career, what do you think they were to date? To Janet's point, you're still going. So what have you done so far?
Well, I would suggest what got me here and keeps me here are some pretty basic characteristics that I developed actually very early on in my career. One of those is humility. And I had some encounters with some very senior volunteer leaders when I worked at the National Ballet of Canada. And I was an early fundraiser. I had just left banking, and of course I thought I knew everything and discovered very quickly that I knew nothing, and that I needed to get comfortable admitting mistakes and admitting that I don't always have the answer and I don't always know what I'm doing. And it's okay to admit that you don't know what you're doing and to ask for help. And so humility is one of those things that has always served me well. It's so much easier to say I don't know. Even just saying those 3 words buys you time to figure out what you do know. So that is one. The other is resilience. And this is something that I think, we all develop to some degree, but as a leader, things knock you off your keister on a regular basis. And if you don't have, inner resilience and the ability to sort of figure things out, dust yourself off, regroup, and do it with calm and poise, you'll always find yourself frustrated, and if you get frustrated, you often make mistakes. So resilience is the second, and the third is humor. And when you've got someone like the esteemed Edmund Bovey raking you over the coals because of the way you badly formatted fundraising letters to corporate CEOs all over the country when you're a 28-year-old know-it-all. You better have a sense of humor so you can recover from the humiliation and the lesson learned. And humor is something I got from my father, and it served him well. And I thought, well, I think it's something that I'm going to call on a regular basis. So humility, resilience, and humor.
Fantastic. Thanks, Megan. Before we get Julie's take on the question, give us just one or two thoughts on resilience. So that's something that's oft talked about. How do you get that? You can't go to the store and buy it, unfortunately.
You can't. And I mean, resilience is something, there are some people who say either you're resilient or you're not. And I don't believe that. I think that you can learn to be resilient by simply, learning what it is to be resilient, and knowing that, it means that you can cope with change. You are adaptable. You are able to deal with bad surprises and good surprises. And a lot of resilience is about being nimble and adaptable and able to cope with expected and unexpected changes while continuing to be focused on the end game. And I think it is something that you can learn as long as you're willing to learn.
Great, thank you. So Julie, your secret sauce, you've got 3 ingredients so far from Meg. What would you throw in the pot here?
Well, I found it hilarious because my first one was be humble, which was Megan's first one. So we agree on that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I would agree with everything that Megan has said. I would add in, don't be scared of asking. The worst that will happen is that somebody says no, which means you're no further ahead than where you were before you asked. So asking questions, not being scared of somebody saying no, particularly for the people who are working in areas like charities or not-for-profits, where you have to ask people all the time if they're willing to donate to you. You have to be comfortable with people saying no to you, and that's okay. On the flip side of that, sometimes one of the leadership skills is don't ask, just do it, and then beg for forgiveness afterwards in case you have made a mistake. So I would add that in. I agree with the resilience, and to answer the question about how to be more resilient, I would say make sure you take care of yourself as a leader. Yeah. Make sure you take your time off. Make sure you have other ways of dealing with the stress, be it exercise or dance or music or video games, whatever works for you to reduce the stress. Taking care of yourself. Remember that the sun comes up tomorrow. So if the worst thing happens, tomorrow will be another day. So don't make mountains out of molehills. That's hard to do on the spot, but it's a lesson that I learned. And then the last thing I would say is you have to trust the people around you. The more you trust the people around you, the more you will find that people do so many incredible things if you just trust them. Trust them to do a great job, and they're going to surpass that expectation by miles. And that has been, at least for me, one of the most important things as a leader.
Fantastic. So we've got a wonderful set of ingredients now boiling up for sure. I love what you said, Julie, about don't be afraid to ask, but don't be afraid also. I think it was Nellie McClung who said, just get the job done and let them howl sometimes.
Yes.
Let that happen too.
Oh, oops.
Yeah, oops, did I do that? Oh, there it is. Proof of concept. What do you know? So I like the ideas about nimble. The humility theme is very interesting. And it leads me to my next question, which is, the woman question. Do we do it differently? Would you say you face particular challenges as a woman in leadership, specifically because you're a woman in leadership, and what did that look like?
who are you asking?
Oh, I'm sorry. Either of you. Anybody can jump in on that one.
I'll jump in. It's interesting. When I was in banking, certainly being a woman in leadership was different. And then I realized that I wasn't suited to banking. As Janet knows me, I'm not big on rules and guidelines, and banks are all about rules. So I wasn't going to last very long. But being a woman in a male-dominated environment, I had to really learn how to observe and to watch and to be aware of how people communicate, how people engage, how women engage. It was really interesting. I was very young. Whereas once I got into the not-for-profit field, it was dominated by women. So it was less about being a woman in leadership because I was surrounded by women in leadership. So that's what's so interesting, leaving financial services and going into arts and then universities and museums. It was a very different dynamic. And yet, I think that I still feel that I need to be very observant and aware and, empathetic. But it was more about being observant and being aware, because certainly early in my career, I found that I had to be very aware of how I behaved, how I spoke, how I treated other people, because people were watching how I behaved as a leader, especially as a woman in leadership. Because it wasn't all women in leadership, and typically the number twos were all women, but the number ones were still all male. So that power of observation and being aware that you are being observed, and you need to be aware of how people are responding to you.
And what would you add to that, Julie?
Well, that's interesting what Meg said, because I had the reverse in terms of my career, where I started out in the nonprofit, primarily in the nonprofit area, where yes, we were surrounded by women. And in fact, when I was the executive director of Nature Canada for 16 years, we mostly had a female executive, and even some female board chairs. So I really didn't feel particularly challenged as a woman in leadership there. And then I transferred into the mining sector, where it is male dominated. And I have to say that at that point in my career, having worked probably 25 years, I didn't feel any difficulty being a female, even in that male dominated mining sector. Where I have felt the most difficulty as a female in leadership was really when in the charitable sector you have to raise funds from foundations and corporations. Often those decision makers are men, and people donate to people, and people donate to people who are like themselves. And sometimes I found that I had sort of wished I was a man asking the male for funding, because they were more comfortable dealing with men. And so that for me was the biggest challenge, was dealing with people when I was trying to raise funds. The male donors, I often felt, geez, if I was just a guy, they'd probably donate to me. But because I'm female, I behave slightly differently. They're not that comfortable. And so I felt that was one of the biggest challenges. And then that next question is, how did you deal with that? And I don't really know that I have a great answer. At a certain point, I realized, there needed to be a change in leadership. And so I left the organization, partly because I felt like I had been there long enough and now they needed something new. So that was one way that I dealt with that particular challenge. But to be honest, in most of my career, which is now 35 years long, I really never, other than that little area, I never really faced any particular challenge being a female in leadership. And I became a leader quite young. So yeah, that's it for me.
Well, and I think that these are really important perspectives for a couple of reasons. I think we could all agree that other women leaders we might speak to who are, you know, writing or speaking have had different experiences than what we have, for sure. I think it's really important to say some of us have had more acuity and some of us have had less in terms of dealing with a lot of challenges. I think that's really an important level setting to say we all have really different experiences. And I loved your idea, Meg, to come back to it, that you reiterated, Julie, around, you know, observing, watching, being aware, starting to become aware as early as is possible of what are the waters I'm swimming in here? What are people expecting of me? What does this look like? I think that's a really interesting thing to be thinking about for all of us as well, and particularly earlier career. Yeah. All right. So Janet, I'm going to move it over to you for the next question.
Okay, and I'm very aware of the time. We want to finish in good time. So I'm going to start with you, Julie. I'll pose the question so you can answer first and then Meg. And if there are a few follow-ups, we'll do that. But I'm sensitive to the time. So really interesting that both of you mentioned empathy. And certainly the qualities that both of you mentioned don't necessarily feature in what some of the literature says about effective leadership, that should combine empathy, creativity, which you both have, I know that, integrity, which I know you both have, confidence, really important. The ability to motivate others, it kind of goes with that territory, and to promote teamwork and collaboration and successful two-way communication. So the question that I'd like, or the questions that I'd like both of you to answer is, do you agree that these are the sort of key ingredients of effective leadership? And is there one of those that you think is more important than the other? And if so, why? So Julie, why don't you kick it off?
Sure. I wouldn't know how exactly to define effective leadership. The one thing in that question that kind of bothers me is the ability to motivate others, because it's really hard to motivate others. People are internally motivated. There's not much you can do to motivate somebody else. They have to be motivated themselves. And it's kind of I'm not sure it's true that leaders have the ability to motivate. My philosophy of leadership has always been absolutely trust the people that work with you or for you. Recognize they know their job better than you do by far. And if you remove the obstacles, get the obstacles out of their way so that they can do the best job that is possible. Give them all the credit, take responsibility for any mistake that they make. They make a mistake, that's my mistake. If you sort of operate with those principles, those are the principles I've always operated with. I found that people just did incredibly amazing jobs. And so I didn't, I don't know if I was empathetic or creative. I just know that I trusted them. I believed in them. I believed in them sometimes more than they believed in themselves. I got obstacles out of the way so they could do their job. When they did a great job, it was all on them. If they made a mistake, it was all on me. So that was sort of what I would describe, for me anyway, was effective leadership.
Very interesting. And, doing all those things is actually helping to lay the groundwork to motivate people. Trust me, when people aren't motivated, if you've ever worked, if you haven't been the leader, and if you've worked in an environment where people aren't motivated, even people who are self-motivated, there's a lot about the external environment that can crush or lift you in terms of that motivation. But I hear what you're saying. I'll come back to you, but Meg, why don't you go ahead?
I think the word that popped out of this for me is integrity. And I think it's directly connected to trust. Because I think effective leadership is very much about your team trusting you to have their back, which goes exactly to what Julie's been saying, because the trust needs to work both ways. People need to trust you as a leader, trust that you have a good vision for the organization, which is all about integrity. And I think that if your people trust you and you demonstrate that you trust them, your leadership will be effective. It will produce great results. People will be inspired and feel that they have lots of room to move the organization they're working for forward. But I think integrity is one that I think is really important, and it still astonishes me how many people, young people, I speak to about integrity, and they don't know what the word means. And so it's just like, well, let's look it up. And then once you look it up, then they realize, oh, okay. I mean, because they know what the concept is, they just aren't as familiar with the word. And I was the same when I was, a young professional. It was just a word that wasn't in my vernacular. So.
Very, very interesting that both of you sort of focused in on that. And it's very topical, I think, right now. I mean, there's a lot of discussion about the issues of integrity and trust. So would you both say that you think that is the sort of cornerstone around which effective leadership can go forward?
So I'll answer first. So trust, I'd never thought of it as two-way trust. So that's a great way to think of it, Meg, because you're right. I have to trust them. They have to trust me. And the only other thing I was going to add, so trust is probably it. One thing I can say that I know that kills motivation is if you're micromanaging people. So in just thinking about what Janet said earlier about, the ability to motivate, I would say the way to kill motivation is to try to do the person's job yourself, or to oversee them with too much detail. I've experienced that in my life, could not stand it. And so, yeah, I try never to micromanage anybody.
Well said. Meg, anything to add before we move on? Because I'm not quite sure. Will we have questions at the end, Christy?
Yeah, absolutely. We can have questions at the end, and people.
Okay.
That's
good. I think Julie said it all.
Okay. So back to you, Christy.
For sure. And, the themes that are building are really interesting and unique around the humility, resilience, trust, all of these major topics in leadership. Now I'd love for you panelists to reflect on, in our current reality, things are complicated. Things are increasingly complex. And while I think in some ways perhaps it was ever thus, the visibility that the internet gives us and the 24/7 and all the complexities of life, are there things that beyond those things that you've already mentioned now in your leadership that you think are going to be really important for us as a community of practice to think about when we think about, man, some of the stuff we're doing now is very complex, many different pieces, parts, interrelationships. Anything additional you wanna think, help us think about that we should add to our skill sets for dealing with those situations?
I'll start in. I think something that is really important for any leader is to be well read, to be aware of what's going on beyond your sector, because there are so many things that are directly and indirectly affecting our organizations, whether it's a museum or it's a university or it's any other kind of NGO. And so as leaders, we need to be aware of what's going on well beyond our sector and our business. And I think that bringing those other perspectives is something that that your teams expect of you and are hoping that you will bring to bear And so certainly I find that, you know, the amount of reading we can do is endless, but sharing the insights that is bringing with the team is increasingly important, just to remind people that there is a world out there, and that they need to be aware of so much more than just what their job is and what the organization is that you're working for.
Wonderful. Thanks. And what would you say about that, Julie, the managing through complexity?
Well, just to reflect on what Meg just said, I would agree with her. So it made me think of the concept of diversity of perspectives. So as a leader, make sure that around you, you have diversity of views. And if you don't have that, bring it in. So either read about it or bring in the expert on blockchain or artificial intelligence or whatever it is that's out there that could disrupt your industry or wherever it is that you're working. So bring in those diverse views and educate your whole organization. So that's one thing. The other thing I would say is, and it links back to the resilience idea, is be careful to not get overwhelmed. So, you know, I'm particularly nervous about people getting sort of overwhelmed with the state of the natural world, for example, and climate risks. And I'm really nervous about people getting overwhelmed by these things. And we need to remember that we can do our part, we can influence others, but don't get overwhelmed, don't give up hope. Keep working at it in your small way and in your big way. But yeah, just be really careful that you don't get overwhelmed by everything.
Great. Thank you. Janet, let's move on to number 4 so we have a little bit of time at the end.
Okay, so Julie, we'll start with you and then move to Meg. When we think about leadership in today's world, the one constant is change and innovation, and the pressure to find new ways to achieve objectives and get the results. And in terms of managing change, which is sometimes difficult, what do you think are the skills that are required to do that and to help others manage that change? I know that in several of the positions that I've had, wow, you know, you just think you're on full steam ahead and suddenly the rug gets pulled and you have to just, you know, keep everything, you know, straight ahead. So talk to us a little bit about managing change.
So I would say the most important thing from a leader in terms of managing change is recognizing that everybody manages change differently. So they often talk about a U-curve of managing change, where you go through a series of steps as you deal almost with any kind of grieving process, almost a similar process for managing change. Some people are going to hop through that really quickly, and they're going to be there within days. If not within hours, and other people are going to struggle through that change. So as a leader, I think it's really important to recognize and to allow people to go through the change management process at their own, or recognize that they're going to have different reactions to that change than you might. So because I grew up in the nonprofit sector primarily, my God, we were changing all the time. When I went to the corporate sector, they talked to me about change management. I had never even heard of the words. And somebody from the corporate sector said to me, well, that's because you were changing every day. And I was like, yeah, we were changing all the time. We had a small ship and we just kept being entrepreneurial and moving through the change. It wasn't that difficult, but in larger organizations, change management is a great big deal. Most people don't manage the change very well. Most people, they don't know why the change is occurring. The burning platform is not there. There's this whole lingo related to managing change. But for me, the most important thing was recognizing that people go through that change differently, and you need to respect that.
Excellent. Meg, let's hear from you.
I think the other key thing that allows sort of fellow like colleagues to recognize, not just the leaders recognizing that everybody goes through change at a different pace and in a different way, but also, you know, we want to make sure that our colleagues understand that it's quite normal for people in an organization to adapt to and go through change in their own way and at their own pace. But the critical thing is being able to communicate the reason for the change and what is the end game? What is the big win at the end? Why are we doing this? And recognizing that you have to repeat that constantly. I was astonished when we were going through the change here at the Museum of Nature that my marketing director would always say, repetition is the spice of life, Meg. You have to repeat every single town hall why we're doing this because people will forget. And so repeat, repeat, repeat. Why are we doing this? What is the end game? And how far have we come? So that people see that there's a bit of a dial and it's moving and how much longer will this take? And of course, I mean, eventually change is the new normal and that's the last thing people want to hear, but it really is the case now. So I think, you know, Julie's bang on. I mean, everybody copes with processes change and in a different way, but also at a different pace. But we have to constantly repeat why we're doing it and what's the big win at the end of the day.
So can I just quickly ask you both to comment on, we're talking about women in leadership. Do you think that women handle change or manage change in any way differently than men? Is there something particular to women and change and innovation? I'd like you both to comment on that. Julie, why don't you go first, and then Meg? If you have any comments that you think would be relevant to our participants.
So, right off the top of my head, I would say that I have read that women's brains are much more amenable to multitasking, to sort of, if we go back evolutionarily, you know, we think of the men used to go hunting, they would focus on one thing, and that's, you know, kill that lion and kill that elephant, so we got to eat, while as the women would be like taking care of the kids, feeding, you know, managing the fire, like just doing 16 different things, while the guys would focus like on one thing. So I wonder if, from it just a pure biological evolutionary perspective, whether or not women can just handle that the sort of multitude of change that happens. But I'm not an expert, so that was just the first thing that came to my mind. Maybe women are a little bit better at managing change just based on pure biology.
Interesting. Meg?
Yeah, and I don't know that women are just naturally better at change management as leaders than men. I think change management, you know, is a thing, and either you take it seriously and recognize that it is difficult, it is complicated, and everybody handles it differently, or you don't. And I think that's more an individual thing than it is a male-female leader thing.
Good, thank you. So Christy, back to you.
Yeah, we do have one more question, but we also, in terms of dipping back in, let me say so far, you know, the wonderful sort of laundry list or recipes that I'm hearing, things that we can keep in mind are, you know, the humor, resilience, humility. I love the juxtaposing, you know, keep an eye on the environment, decide whether you want to jump in or not. I like the keeping the overwhelm to a minimum. I think we could have a whole conversation on that, because I think it's a very overwhelming environment for a lot of us. And to Janet's last question about change, like it is, and the comments that were made, and it is changes in the eye of the beholder, and it does seem it is constant, which is not necessarily helpful. If we got one more story from each of you around your leadership, tell us about a time when things got tough and what got you through it. So, Julie, let's start with you.
So I guess what got me through times getting tough were asking for help when I needed it, having support. So make sure you are paying attention to your support system, which are the people in your lives. Don't forget about the people who are really close to you. Make sure your relationships are strong and they're there to help you when it does get tough. And I would say take a break if you really need it. Nothing wrong with that. Before, please take a break before you crash, because that's totally not worth doing. The last thing I would say is I became a coach. If you're dealing with difficult, specific situations, get a thinking partner, get a coach to help you think through how you're going to handle things.
So don't be afraid to ask for help. Yeah, that's great.
And I think that's it bears a lot of repeating, Julie, and you have said it a few times, but I think that I came very late to that, and I wished I'd come to that a lot earlier, because it's generally not that big a deal. It's a bigger deal to me often than it is to anyone else, for sure. Yeah. And what about you, Meg?
Well, it's very similar. For me, first and foremost, is focus on what really matters. Because when the going gets tough, you just don't sweat the small stuff. Focus on what really, really matters. And find, I like the way you described it, Julie, a thinking partner. Find someone who you trust, who you can talk things through. Because whether it's a boss, whether it's a financial challenge, whether you're dealing with board, whether you're dealing with a new government, you often need to have a thinking partner and somebody who you trust so you can really talk things through. Sometimes that can be your partner at home, but if it's within a work environment, ideally it's somebody you trust in the workplace. I think the other thing when the going gets tough is to sort of revisit your personal moral compass and to reestablish who you are, what makes you who you are, so that you always ensure that your moral compass is guiding your actions and your decisions. Because when the going gets tough, sometimes it's easy to get lose sight of your moral compass and what your core values are as a person.
That's wonderful, Meg. I love that. And that's a great summary. We are at 12:46, and we said we were going to be 45 minutes. We should have known better. We really should have known better. But this has been fantastic. I do think one of the things that's coming out toward the end is, knowing ourselves is so important, knowing what makes us passionate, knowing where we stand on things, so that when things do start to knock us around, we can go back to that place of knowing why was I doing this in the first place, perhaps. For sure. Would love to just, if there are burning questions, we do have a couple popping up. So there's some interest in being a leader and having a successful career, and then having family obligations and expectations around that. Do you folks have some sage advice or thoughts that you might be able to offer the group on finding those balances?
This is Julie. I would say, don't neglect the family. When Meg talks about focusing on what's really important, that's what's really important. Those kids are only going to be 4 and 5 and 6 once in your lifetime. And if you miss it, I remember one of my senior mentors, who was a man, said to me, I missed my kids growing up. And I just thought, I am not doing that. So they were a priority for sure. So that's one thing. I just wanted to add one other thing. When you're a leader, it's often lonely at the top. You can't always find that thinking partner in your organization. So make sure you're networked with other female leaders or other leaders to help you deal with some of the challenges. So those are 2 pieces of advice I would give. Yeah,
and I really just echo that, is that when you understand what really matters, family is absolutely critical. And so it's finding ways to maintain some balance, knowing that when things are really crazy, sometimes balance is not there, but you still have to find a time for balance. Because if you don't, one, it will make you sick. It just does. So you really have to invest in it, and it takes time and effort.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Any other burning questions? You can put your hand up or tap one into the chat. While we have people doing that, I would actually like to invite everybody to the after party. So while people may be conjuring one or two more things, we knew that we're so pleased to see so many people out today. I think we had 20 odd people on the Zoom, and then 3 more folks. Thank you for calling in. You folks who called in, please make sure we have your email so you can continue on. On the same site as for those of you, and most of you are have had some experience with the Women for Nature mentoring program, we actually have put a discussion forum there and a few resources just for conversation. We didn't have a huge chat today about, women leaders versus not women leaders, although I think we can start to see and observe how some of our unique characteristics might come forward. But this would be a place where we can continue the discussion. And right after this webinar wraps up, we'll make sure that everybody has the links in hand so that they can jump on, ask any questions you might think about later. If you have resources you want to share, that would be a place that you can do it there as well. So before we wrap, are there any other things that I think we've sort of opened the door to a lot of fantastic topic areas, and we've got some wonderful advice to think about and best practices to think about from our panelists. Anything else, Janet, that you want to, I'm just waiting to see if any more questions pop up. Anything you wanted to end with, Janet, as well?
No, I just want to thank Meg and Julie, because I think you've both brought up some really, really important points. And I want to actually talk about something that happened to me early in my career. I was with the diplomatic service, and I was a single mother, the first single mother ever posted by Foreign Affairs, and I was told before I was sent on a posting not to make a mistake, because I was serving as, the first person, and it put a huge responsibility on my shoulders. And I remember thinking, once I'd gotten to the post, that was so ridiculous that I had to act the way I always had if I was going to be successful and help others be successful. And I think for young women, there is always that worry about how we're going to handle our family obligations and our work obligations, and which comes first. And I think that it's really, really important to try and find that balance. Really important.
Mm-hmm. And you'll be looking a long time, because it doesn't last when you get it. Just throwing that in from my own experience. It kind of goes like,
yeah.
But definitely a worthwhile topic for exploration, for sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Julie, and thank you, Meg, and thank you, Christy.
You're very welcome. It was a great conversation.
It was a fantastic conversation. We're so honored to have had it and to be part of hosting it. As I said, we're going to continue the party on the platform. We will have another webinar coming up in just a few weeks. Actually, I think we're gunning for the second week of July. So that will be coming along as well. And if you have any issues getting on the platform, let us know. We will have, Nature Canada will be posting a version of this webinar if you wanted to review any pieces. We'll also send out some notes and put that in the platform as well, just to stimulate discussion. We'd love to keep it going. So one more time, thank you so much, panelists. Thank you, everyone, for attending. I think it was a fantastic kickoff. It's wonderful to have this group of people together, because we know that at the base of it, we're supporting people who are changing the world. And that's very, very near and dear and very meaningful to us. So, well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Take care, everybody.
Okay.
Bye-bye.